right. I can still wait like 2 minutes in case people are running a little late and then we can.
Yeah. Let's give a couple minutes and
It's live now.
all right, thank you.
Jay, can you verify if you can see on Facebook?
Yeah, I'm checking. Yeah, it says it's live, and I'm gonna play. Yeah, I can see. You can hear the resound, and I'm gonna mute it. Yeah, we are live on Facebook. I'll probably give another minute or two. It's about 5:59, and then we can kick it off.
All right, I guess we can start. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming today. Basically today we're gonna try to have a discussion about mental health, in particular concerning kids of Indian origin, kids and adolescents. So just a quick background on MCICC. So McLean County Indian Community Cares is initiative by fellow Bloomington Normal community members who aim to serve residents in need. This group collaborates with various local organizations to provide useful information to the Indian diaspora. During the pandemic, MCICC created a virtual help desk with validated and cataloged resources for potential needs for McLean County residents and their loved ones in India. Over the past few months, community residents made the group aware of broader needs. As a result, we're having this panel today, and they also had a financial education webinar last fall. And all right, I just wanted to let everyone know that this panel will be live streamed. So I didn't want anyone to say something that they might regret later. And then to begin, I'll just have both our panelists introduce themselves, and then we could hopefully ask them a few questions and pick their brains. Would you like to start, Dr. Susarla?
Sure. My name is Viji Susarla. I'm a clinical psychologist practicing in Illinois for the last 30 some years. I have a practice in Naperville, Illinois, and one in downtown Chicago. I've been doing a lot of these webinars and panel discussions in the last few years. And I also do monthly mental health awareness talks. I have done most of them for 2 years. This year, I started adding other people. And the other thing I do is research on the Indian diaspora, because there is not much data accumulated so far. So that's another thing I do besides my seeing my clients. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. And then Nona, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, my name is Nona Waller. I'm the outreach coordinator at the McLean County Center for Human Services here in Bloomington. Our program provides mental health services for youth in the McLean County area. We work with youth ages 4 to 18-ish on anything from anxiety, depression, behavioral issues, family stressors, that kind of thing. I've been working there about 10 years. We've seen a lot of kids kind of come through our doors, and I would definitely say in the past, 6 months, 9 months, we've definitely seen a big increase in need in the community. One of the nice things about our program is that where most programs you would have to go to the office to meet with a clinician, we are able to go out and meet with our clients out in the community. So we meet with them at school, we can come out to the houses, we do programming out in the community, that kind of thing, which is really nice. I also teach mental health first aid, which is a really, really great resource and class for anyone in the community to learn a little bit more about mental health for both youth and adults, and to learn some strategies to help someone who may be struggling with some mental health issues.
Thank you for that introduction and everything that you do. So kind of going off of what you were saying, could you like define mental health for us? And then could you kind of tell us more about why we should care about mental health?
Of course. So mental health, it really does depend on how clinical you want to get with your definition, but I like to think of it in terms of functioning. So if someone has good mental health, it means that they are able to function in all of the roles that they have in their community. So that could be, academic. If they're a student, it could be having good relationships with friends and family. It could be participating in work. It could be being able to take good physical care of themselves, maintain daily routines, that kind of thing. So if someone is able to be successful in all of those areas, that would kind of count as having good mental health. A lot of times what we see when kids are referred to us is that they start struggling in one or more of those areas. And so when you are struggling in one or more of those areas for different reasons, obviously your quality of life goes down, and it can, especially if you're a youth, it can really affect a whole lot of different areas. So maybe it starts out as maybe struggling in school or having issues with relationships, but then it can then move on to incorporating both of those areas that are now difficult for you for whatever reason. And then it can kind of increase in difficulty for you until many or most of all of those areas start being affected. And so what I'd like to see is when youth or when people start struggling in maybe one or two areas, is to reach out, get some assistance, and that way it will not then spread to lots of different areas of their life.
Dr. Susarla, could you talk more about like common signs and symptoms that youth present with when they're struggling with mental health? And then also, are there certain like signs or symptoms you've noticed specifically in Indian youth?
The common signs, if we stay with the kids, the common signs would be, drop in grades, tardiness, having a hard time waking in the morning, absences, stomach aches, headaches, things like that, being distracted, having panic attacks, those kinds of things in kids. In adults with depression, even in kids, there's a lot of suicidality, suicidal thinking or plan, those kinds of things, lack of energy, fatigue, even though they're young, irritability. Often depression manifests in kids and senior citizens as irritability. So we think it's rebellion, but in fact, they're saying that there's some distress within them. A lot of crying spells, cutting behavior. These are also part of the signs and symptoms of anxiety. obsessiveness about things. So this kind of, hallucinations, delusion, there's a whole gamut of signs and symptoms. The point, of course, is whether or not they impact one's life, right? Whether it impacts one's quality of life, whether it impacts their ability to cope with stressors that are normal to all our lives, and whether or not it impacts their ability to be productive and have good relationships with people, as Nona was talking about. Now, in Indian population, what I see, as I said, there isn't that much data that is out there. What I see in my practice is a lot more physical symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, not being able to wake up in the morning, nightmares, poor sleep. These more physical symptoms are seen in Indian kids.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So how do you, or I guess, Nona, you can answer this too, like, how do you kind of, when someone, like, how do you kind of notice that children are having these symptoms? Do they come to their parents to talk about these mental health issues, or do they talk to their friends, or who do you usually think are the go-to people for kids when they're struggling with their mental health?
Again, I want you to know that I'm basing this on my practice, 35 years. The first people that kids try to go to is their parents. And once that doesn't quite work out, if the parents dismiss it or think it's really no big deal, then from then on, they're only going to their friends. So these are the two sets of people that kids go to for to talk about these things. Is that your experience, Nona?
I think it really does depend. I think there's definitely kids who will try and reach out to their parents, even if it's not directly. In my experience, we don't have a lot of kids, going up to their parents saying, I think I'm depressed, I think I'm anxious, I think I need to talk to somebody. But kids, like you said, doctor, will more act out or have, again, some more of those physical symptoms, some of those kind of almost asking for help behaviors, because they're either not able to, they don't feel comfortable saying, I think I am depressed, I think I'm anxious, or they don't have the words for it. They don't actually have the vocabulary to be able to say, this is how I'm feeling. I think a lot of times kids do go to their friends. And I'm not as familiar, obviously, with Indian culture and what it's like to maybe experience some of that, especially maybe if you're first, second, third generation, you still have really strong ties to maybe traditional Indian culture where expectations are a little bit different as far as who you talk to about how you're feeling and different things like that. I know typically in a lot of American culture, kids will gravitate more towards their friends than they will necessarily their parents. One of the things that we always encourage kids, excuse me, and what we also encourage parents is to understand that, if the parent is not the first person or the person that the child confides in a lot, that's okay. As long as the child is able to find an appropriate adult figure that they can confide in, and maybe that's an aunt or an uncle, a grandparent, someone at school, that kind of thing. As long as they have that good connection with an adult who might have better access to maybe more professional resources if those are needed, or who can maybe identify, oh, this is really serious, we need to let your parents know that you've been feeling this way. I think a lot of times kids are much more likely to kind of take care of things within their own friendship circle, and not necessarily reach out to an adult until maybe it's a little bit, way more serious. And that's like, oh gosh, Now we're almost in a crisis situation because we didn't know who to reach out to, or we weren't able to reach out to an adult.
Yeah, I found a significant difference between the immigrant parent and the first generation child.
I could see that, absolutely. Mhm.
And the first generation child is still trying to find a foothold in the world, and that dynamic between the immigrant parent and the first generation child is very significant and something that we need to pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say we see that a lot with Hispanic families. So if there's parents who are more recent immigrants from Hispanic culture, there's often a lot of confusion from the parents, or maybe even frustration. Well, why is my child acting like this? Or why aren't they telling me that they're feeling this way? And kind of that disconnect. Well, back in my home country, my hometown, this is how this would play out. And the fact that it plays out a little bit differently now here in Illinois in America can cause tension and stress that then can add to some, maybe mental health stuff that may already be happening.
That dynamic is a pretty big stressor in their lives. Yeah, they want to please. Naturally, kids want to please their parents, and that's where the rub comes, and they have a hard time with all good intentions on everybody's side.
Yeah, everybody wants the child to be successful, to be happy, to be at their best. Sometimes how one goes about that can be a little bit different depending on one's point of view. And I think sometimes that's where some of that conflict comes in, even though everybody wants the same end result.
So
I also found that immigrant parents tend to kind of freeze where they were when they moved to this country. And they cling to those values much more stronger, much stronger than if they were back in India. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Gautami, I interrupted you.
Honestly, I've read that so many times, what you just said, that it's something that I think a lot of Indian parents don't necessarily understand, that they do kind of cling to the values at the period when they immigrated here. And I think there has been research kind of showing that too. So it's important that sometimes Indian parents understand that. Kind of keeping with the same vein, like how can Indian parents like help their children open up about their mental health struggles? What is like, okay, so say like a kid comes to their parent and says that, oh, I'm struggling, like I'm having anxiety, like what is the right thing to say in that moment to kind of help them open up and talk a little bit more about their feelings?
Yeah. It's very important that parents be open themselves. For the kid to be able to open up to the parent must be open themselves. And when I say open, what I mean is that they listen to what the kids are saying. Much of the time, parents think they know all the answers. And perhaps their answers worked for them. And that's the reason why they're, sharing that with the kids. But it's extremely important that parents listen to what the kids are saying. The second thing is when it comes to issues of mental health and illness, I think it's very important for parents to educate themselves about it. And instead of resisting it, avoiding it, I think it's important for them to educate themselves about that. Now, when I say educate, what I mean is know that if you meet 4 people, out of the 5, 1 will have a mental illness. So it's very, very common. It's very important to normalize that for children. Hey, this is common. The environment of the home should be such that we'll be able to deal with it. We'll be able to manage it. We'll be able to, come out successfully. whatever the situation we are facing, we'll be able to be, as a family together, putting all our resources together, we'll be able to deal with it effectively. So if that kind of an environment is nurtured by the parents, then the kids will be more likely to go and talk to the parents. You know, by education, I also mean that 1/4 of all mental illnesses will manifest by the time the child is 14 years old. 3/4 of mental illnesses manifest by the time the young adult is 24 years old. So by 24 years, whoever is supposed to get, manifest this mental illness, they're already there. So I think it's important for parents to educate themselves about what is mental illness, how does it impact. It's also important for them to know their own family histories. And that is the most frustrating part of my job. I do a very thorough history. And most of even the young parents do not know if there was a mental health history in their families. I kind of assume, because wherever I go, I see, if you search enough, you'll figure out that there is something somewhere. So, and it's important for parents to know that there's a 10-year gap from the time a person experiences mental health issues and the time they actually get treatment. Now, this I'm talking about in Caucasians. 50% of Caucasians go and get mental, help. 20% of Asians go and get help. So these are the things that I think parents should be aware of. And that will help them create this environment where they can discuss these things. They can figure out what to do, and hopefully they will listen.
I think it's very important for parents to be able to understand that what their children are feeling is valid, even if the parent doesn't quite understand or maybe even doesn't agree with what their child is saying. If a child comes to a parent and says, I'm depressed, I'm very sad, and the parent responds with, well, what do you have to be sad about? We have a house, we have food, you have video games, you have new clothes, we have all of these things, what reason do you have to be sad? What that message sends that child is that my sadness is not okay to express. And if I try to share those kinds of feelings with my parent, it's not going to be accepted as real. And so I think a lot of time for parents, it can be really hard to be understanding that their child is maybe feeling some of these things, even though there may not be a physical or environmental necessarily linked to it, that there may just be other stressors that maybe the parents aren't aware of, or that the stressors that the child is experiencing being here in the US may be different than the stressors that the parent or the grandparents grew up with somewhere else, I think is really, really important. And I think it's really important also for parents to be able to kind of respond in a non-judgmental way. And instead of saying, well, why are you sad? You shouldn't be sad. There's no reason for you to be sad. To accept that and say, okay, well, can you tell me more? Tell me more about what you're feeling. Tell me more about what's going on. Because that is going to allow the child to open up more, to feel more connected to the parent. And if they do start experiencing maybe something like feelings of self-harm, feelings of suicide, those kinds of things, they're much more likely to then go to the parent, because the parent has been open to talking about things when they weren't at that crisis level of concern and stress and distress.
Thank you for those answers. I think especially like answering exactly what parents should say or shouldn't say kind of helps when you're in the moment. and your child comes to you with a problem. I guess also kind of in this vein, can we talk a little bit more about therapy and like when should kids start therapy, and kind of also just talking a little bit about the stigma against therapy. I mean, speaking from someone who's in their 20s, I know that a lot of my friends always, and I know like a lot of the younger kids, like teenagers, will always be like, everyone should go to therapy. Like everyone has things they could kind of hash out at therapy. But then also talking to adults like who are older than like 35, I know they're thinking along the vein like, oh, therapy is only for people who are struggling with, like who have like a problem, who like need serious help. So could you talk a little bit about that stigma too, and how we can kind of like, when is therapy appropriate, and how we can kind of get more people to be involved in like therapy?
Therapy is definitely necessary when the issues, mental health issues, are impacting their day-to-day life, their productivity, their quality of life. So definitely at that time, it is necessary. It's not totally wrong to say all of us need therapy. We are living in a very stressful world. There are so many expectations. The stress is only increasing. And we know that because depression, anxiety, suicidality have increased tremendously. So I think it is okay for people to so it used to be mental health, before the world wars, the goal of psychology research used to be not just to treat illness, but also to enhance life. So that has somehow slowly changed because of the world wars and resources, and also a lot of trauma that came along with the world wars. So the whole focus shifted to illness. But really, one should use it for enhancement of life as well. That's what the whole field of positive psychology is all about. So I believe that, yes, when life is a big struggle, you need therapy, but also to enhance oneself, I think it's a good idea to go into therapy.
I definitely think that there is still, in some people's minds, the idea that if you go to therapy, you're crazy, you're dangerous, and that if you go to therapy, you will be in therapy for the rest of your life, that you will never, you'll never have any sort of recovery. And it's once you go in, you're never coming out. And that's very, very much not true at all. Therapy does not have to be long-term by any means. So if someone does decide, hey, I do need to talk to somebody, it could be as short as, 3 or 6 months. If it's more a kind of short-term stressor or that kind of stuff. And a lot of it is learning new skills. So maybe when someone is stressed out, they always do the same thing. And if they go to therapy, that therapist, that clinician can maybe explore, well, what are some other things that you can do to deal with that stress? If you always go for a jog and that's not working for you anymore, let's look at some other options that could help you. That kind of stuff with kids, and with adults as well, but again, kind of focusing here on youth. There's a lot of apps for phones that are, stress, anxiety, sleep, relaxation, different apps like that. And I always encourage kids and their adults in their life, if you have a smartphone and you don't feel like you have the time or the expense or whatever, find a relaxation app that you like, find one of the free mood tracker apps to just kind of get you started and maybe make it more of a, be more mindful of your moods, be more mindful of some different things you can do. There's a lot of books and workbooks out there that people, adults and youth, can use to explore if they're feeling a little bit anxious, if they're maybe struggling with some stressors, that kind of thing. So another thing to remember is that, you know, therapy is not the only option. There's lots of options out there. And if you don't feel as the therapy, or if you're not able to access therapy or that kind of thing, there's lots of other options out there that don't require talking to someone face to face necessarily. And even if you do talk to someone face to face, it's not going to be for the rest of your life, most likely. It's going to be for a certain period of time. And then once you've learned some new skills, or the stress has resolved, you learned how to deal with it a little bit better, then, you know, you don't have to participate in that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Could you touch a little bit more on the other resources? I know we have a document and we're gonna like share the website as well with a list of resources, but at the beginning you had mentioned your mental health first aid, like you could talk about that, or just like Dr. Susarla, if you have any other resources you just want to like tag verbally, that would be nice.
I can talk a little bit about mental health first aid. So mental health first aid is an 8-hour class. It's designed for people in the community, so you don't have to necessarily have a specific role. You don't have to be a parent. You don't have to work in a certain area or field. We do have them in the community. You can look at the McLean County Health Department organizes our classes, and they're held in the community. There's ones that focus more on youth. There's ones that focus on adults. We also have a class that focuses on older adults, a whole different range of people. But it's an 8-hour class. You learn a little bit about different kinds of mental health issues, kind of what are some things to look for as far as functioning. It does give you a template as far as if you are concerned about somebody, how can you approach them? What's helpful? What kind of resources are there in the community that you could maybe share with them? What are some ways that you could help them use their own resources without having to go to a professional differently? It's really, really good. And I really, really encourage anyone to go to a mental health first aid training. Like Dr. Susarla said, you know, there's much more of a chance that someone you know is maybe dealing with some mental health issues, even if maybe they haven't talked to you about it or you don't necessarily know. It's much more common. And the more that we are able to kind of talk about it amongst ourselves and make it less stigmatized, the more people are, when they are struggling, are going to reach out for help when they need it, because they're not going to feel like, oh, I can't do that because I'm weak, or that means I'm crazy, or those kind of stereotypes and stigmatizing thoughts that we have in society, for sure.
Okay, so one other question before we turn it over to the audience. So part of like an important concept of when we talk about youth mental health is also thinking about parents. So when their kid is struggling with their mental health, what are some resources for parents? Especially considering that there is stigma and they might not want to share with their friends. And like usually you think even in parents, like their friends are a good support system, but sometimes it can be isolating when they don't want to share about their kids' mental health issues. So if you guys want to speak on that a little bit, and how like parents can kind of help their kids, and how could they kind of have to help themselves to help their kids. That's what I want to say. Yeah.
I do think education is very important. And sometimes parents dismiss these issues by saying, well, it's just regular ups and downs of life. It could be very well be regular ups and downs, or it could be much more serious. So to be able to distinguish that, if they cannot distinguish, then they can ask their primary care physician, hey, my kid is talking about this. What do you think about this? Do you think it's something that I need to worry about? Or they can talk to the pediatrician and say, hey, do you think there's something here that I need to worry about? What I've noticed in the practice is that most parents don't do that. They don't even take it to the first level of defense. So I always encourage parents to sit, talk it out. Just if you don't want to talk to your friends, talk to your doctors, and they will be able to, another thing that stops them from talking about it is they think a mental illness is a reflection of parenting. And that's another thing. It's very shameful for parents. And I want parents to know that it is not a reflection of parenting. It could be, but it is not necessarily. The chances are it's more, the brain is an extremely complex organ. It has 100 billion cells, each cell can another 100,000 other cells. And it's an extraordinary network. My car breaks down all the time, which is a complex machine itself. You can only imagine what it is when it comes to the brain-mind complex. Things will go wrong. And there's nothing shameful about it. It's something that we need to understand and take action towards. And there's so much work done about how to deal with, mental illness, the first aid kit that you're talking about, Nona. I mean, there's so much information. There's an explosion now of apps, So if parents feel uncomfortable, they can go to those apps and take a look at them. What do they, how can I use them for the sake of my kids? The thing I also notice is that parents just say, go meditate or do yoga. I'm talking about the Indian community. Now, meditation and yoga are extraordinary systems. There is no doubt about that. But it's not something that you just do. It's something that has to become a part of life. That's when it helps. So if parents think that's the route to go, then they have to practice themselves. They have to model themselves, and they have to teach the kids right from the beginning, not just because I said so, but because it is something useful and we all do it together. So some of the things that, parents just snap out of it, it's all in your head. What do you have to be, depressed about? So all these things are is something that parents want to reconsider.
I always encourage parents as well, and you'll forgive me. I'm not well versed in the relationship that the parents in the Indian community have with the educational system all the time. But one thing that I would encourage a parent to do as well is not only talk to their primary care physician, which I think is a really important step. And when they do talk to that primary care physician, don't just say, well, my child is having stomach aches, my child is having headaches. If they've said, I'm feeling sad, things like that is also important to bring up. A lot of times we do focus more on the physical symptoms, the headaches, the fatigue, that kind of stuff. But if there are other, maybe more internal symptoms that are going on that the parents are aware about, making sure to try and share that with the physician as well, that will help the physician, get a better picture of what's going on. Additionally, talking to the school staff, so the school social worker or the school guidance counselor, your child's teacher, if you're concerned, maybe they've been behaving differently at home, or you're noticing some things at home, talk to the school, see if the school has been noticing similar things. If the school has any concerns, a lot of times when we get referrals for our program, we get them from the school because either the school has noticed some things and is concerned and then has followed up with the parents, or the parents have come to the school and said, hey, I'm noticing these things. Are you guys seeing the same issues, or are you seeing different issues? What should we do about it? The school is a really good resource if you feel like your child is struggling, not just academically, but also emotionally, because they're with your kids, for so many hours during the school year. They really get to know them, and they'll be able to identify, oh, hey, this child is acting differently than they were 3 months ago in the fall. What might be happening?
Yeah, I also noticed that parents express the concern. If we talk to the school, it will get into the record. Often they say that to me, and I tell them, yes, I mean, whatever record is, this is all confidential information. That the school counselor is not going to write a letter to the college saying that these are the problems the kid had. They don't. They really help out. I always encourage them to talk to the teachers, the counselors, and it takes some convincing, but they're worried that somehow that is going to be detrimental for the kid, and it is really not.
Yeah, and there's definitely situations where, maybe the stressor is based at school. Maybe it is, even if it's not academic, maybe it's a peer issue or something like that is more centered at school. That child may not need to go to therapy per se. They may need to work with school staff, the school counselor, or their teachers to kind of help address that in the school setting, which will then lessen some of that stress or distress and, help with some of those emotional things as well. So sometimes, again, it's not necessary. You don't have to go to therapy if you're struggling. There may be other options that are more appropriate or could provide more assistance depending on the specifics of the situation.
All right, thank you for those answers. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? You can either put it in the chat and I can read it out loud, or you can unmute yourself to ask the question, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Awesome discussion. Thank you. I just have a quick question. This is more on the preventative side. So what are your thoughts on the 3 things a parent can do to improve the mental health of their kids? And we can go with Nona and then with Dr. Susarla. If each one of you can point out 3 things that parents can proactively do. Thank you.
I would say probably the number one thing is, again, having that non-judgmental response. When your child comes to you and says, I'm struggling, or, and we see this a lot with, maybe they're in high school and they're experiencing, maybe they're starting to thinking about dating for the first time, and oh, well, so-and-so, I have a crush on them, but they don't have a crush on me back, and it's really hard, and that kind of stuff. Being able to validate that, yeah, you're right, that is really hard, instead of, well, it's okay. There's plenty of fish in the sea. You don't need to be dating anyway, so I don't know why you're worried about this. The more accepting that parents can be when their kids come to them with problems, I think is always better. And parents, and I do it too, is we like to problem solve. If someone says, I'm having this problem, our minds immediately go to, okay, here are some solutions. This is what I've done. This is what other people have done. Here's, and sometimes kids don't need their problem solved. They just need to talk it out. So being willing to listen to them and to just kind of talk it out, I think is one of the biggest things that parents can do. When was the last time someone gave you advice for something that you did not ask for that you found really helpful? Usually not very often.
Yeah, right.
It's the same with kids. If they just need to kind of talk about what they're stressed out about, they're not necessarily looking for you to solve that problem. They don't need that. They just need someone to say, yeah, that's really hard. I'm here for you. You know, do you want help? If so, let's figure it out together. And I think that's one of the biggest things that parents can do, is just provide support without jumping into problem solving, and provide it in a non-judgmental way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree completely. If there's one thing I would say is listen, listen, and listen. You asked for three, and those are three things. Now, having said that, we are living in a pretty complex world, and I think it's important for a parent to anticipate issues. Understand that there's a developmental stage. All individuals go through developmental stages, and every stage has a way of certain issues that come up in every stage, and they need some proper resolution, a good resolution. So I would encourage parents to anticipate problems. If we look at Indian parents, kids will date. Whether they tell you or not is a different issue. They'll do it behind your back if they know that you don't approve. So I see so many different things that come up: how to dress, how to sit, how to talk, how to walk, where to sit, whether you can stay in your room or not, you know, who to talk to, who not to talk. There's so many rules that are there, and it's important for value should be maintained. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, how you communicate those values become extremely important. You don't want to create a friction, at which point the values will not be practiced anyway, right? So I would suggest that we anticipate problems, not just, you know, there are sexuality, gender issues, all these things are out there. If we are still talking about whether somebody should wear a sleeveless shirt or not, when are we going to talk about all these, you know, 32 different genders? When are we going to talk about all those things, right? What I would like parents to see happen is that they draw very broad boundaries. There are very few non-negotiables, and for that, the parent needs to think about what are these very, very few non-negotiables, and how am I going to communicate it? It's not enough to have non-negotiables. It's that's a no-brainer. Don't do drugs, don't have sex, you know, it's a no-brainer. No, but how do you communicate that to the child is something that a parent should really, really think about. If we are judgmental, if we are cross-examining all the time, you know, that is not going to lead to having an environment where people can talk freely. So that is what I notice.
Along that line as well, if one of those broader boundaries is broken, is crossed, you do find out that, you know, maybe your child is doing something that you don't approve of, or that maybe they are saying they're gay, or they're dating someone, or whatever it is. As a parent, it's important to kind of prepare your response for that, because kids are going to make mistakes. Kids are going to do things that as parents, we don't agree with, we don't approve of. But if you kind of go down with a really, really heavy hand, they're not going to come to you when they have another problem, because they're going to say, well, when I did this thing that I thought was not that big of a deal, you know, mom or dad really, really came down on me, so I'm not going to tell them about anything else. So I think it's real important, you know, when you set up those boundaries in your mind, you kind of think, okay, so if my child does say, you know, I did do this, or you find out that your child did this, how are you going to respond as a parent in a way that says, I'm disappointed and I don't want this to happen again, while also understanding that, you know, it may happen again, or something different may happen again. And how are you going to maintain that relationship knowing that your kids are going to test those boundaries and may break them every now and then.
So before we move on to the next question, I'm not an expert, but I wanted to, first of all, what Dr. Susarla said, definitely with Indian parents and my personal experience, I think it's important to really push those boundaries, because what I feel like a lot of times what happens is they're always kind of going back and reflecting on their own experiences, and they'll talk about how they made it here. And that is very important. And kids are like, I've yet to find a kid who's like, wow, I'm not grateful. Like, they are grateful, but at the same time, we are living in a different world, and that generational gap like really shines through. And in order for parents to become better parents, in my opinion, you need to like think about, how can I, like, my kid is my priority, and I need to make sure I help my kid, instead of thinking about like log kya kahenge, going back to Hassan Minaj's really funny like skit. But instead of thinking about like, what are people going to say when they find out this, I think parents is like center stage should be, how can I help my kid, like, screw the other people. And
I
that's
will
just, like,
definitely,
personally
Spot
what I
on.
feel.
Yep.
I will definitely say that the generation gap and the difference between kids and teenagers now compared to even 10, 15 years ago is really big. And it is not just Indian parents, it's not just Hispanic parents, it's not, just white parents, it is parents, period. Your kids are growing up in a radically different world than you ever did. And I don't care what nationality, what ethnicity, anything like that. You've got to be able to understand that just because you grew up a certain way, your kids are growing up in a totally different world. And you've got to be able to understand that and, have some knowledge of what that might look like.
A big part of it is the social media.
Mm.
And kids do not need parents. They can get anything they want on their social media, and which is within limits, more non-judgmental, so they can get anything they need from their friends across the world. They don't need parents. So it is extremely important for parents to ponder on this, introspect on this, meditate on this, to see what their role is and what they want their role to be. They still, they still should be primary in their kids' lives, which is being threatened by social media. So it's important for parents to think about that. One other thing that I noticed in my clients is that the spousal relationship also makes a very big difference. So how parents behave with each other also makes a big difference. That's something else that in terms of preventive, I think really child rearing, marriage itself and then child rearing should be a very thoughtful process, in my opinion.
Thank you so much.
So there was a question in the chat. What advice do you have for parents who made some mistakes in the past? How can they re-engage their kids going forward?
I see this all the time. The first thing I tell parents is leave the kids alone for a while. Just leave them alone. It's not that the kids don't want to engage with the parents, they do. But then if you push it, it'll break more. So the first thing I tell them is leave them alone for a while. The next thing to do, build up the relationship, is to be very careful about how they speak to them. Most of the time, it's young adults and adult children who are, because younger adults till high school, they don't have a choice. They kind of put up with whatever happens, right? Both sides. It's only when they go off to college, some kids just say, I want nothing to do with my parents. And that's when I tell the parents, just leave them alone for a little bit. They will, usually they do come back.
Mhm.
And the second thing is, going forward, how are you going to communicate with them? It's very important to learn that communication skill.
I think it can be very powerful for adults in a child's life to be able to admit either that they made a mistake or that they are not perfect. I think, as when you're a young child, your parents are on a pedestal. They can do no wrong. They are your everything because they are your everything. They feed you, they clothe you, they do everything. As children age, become closer to adulthood or even young adults, they start to realize that, oh, my parents are human and I'm going to treat them like they are human to some extent. And so I think that it can be important for parents to recognize that, oh, my child is starting to see me more as a more of an equal, more of a human being than as this bigger, person over me. And if they can explain what their thought process was, instead of maybe being a little bit more rigid and kind of saying, well, because I said this thing, it is always going to be that way. I think that can also help that youth, that child, feel like their parent is accepting that they are more of an adult now, that they are older now, that they have those changes in that relationship a little bit. And that can be really, really hard for parents sometimes to for that transition of being seen as the ultimate power to maybe someone that's a little bit closer to human. And I think that in different family structures, different background structures, that can be really, really difficult if you are expected to be respectful to anyone who is older than you, regardless of how they treat you. I think that sometimes having some of those conversations can be real hard. So figuring out, how you want that to happen can be real important.
Yeah. In fact, it's important to train the parents how to apologize, because we always say, I'm sorry, but, and the but will be much longer than I'm sorry. So it's very important to even train how to, say sorry.
So another question in the chat following that one is for first generation immigrants or parents in that matter, the first kid is always a guinea pig, as you usually have so many expectations. By the time they realize that the kid has become older and you weren't their handling of their first kid wasn't ideal. So do you have any suggestions that someone could give, like younger friends or cousins who are kind of raising their first immigrant kids at this point, and just like to help them not make the same mistakes? And I think this is kind of talking to like having expectations as an Indian parent and how to manage those expectations.
It would be great if the parent can share with other parents more than a professional telling. I think it'll be great. I think it's a good idea to be able to share their experience. The way to do it is to share their experience. Instead of giving advice, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. Watch out for it. Instead, you say, I did this and it didn't work out. I think would be, share their personal experience. It would be very, very useful. Yeah.
I think that there is a lot of pressure put on parents to do everything perfect all of the time when raising their children. And if they have friends who are parents or relatives, or if they have a community of other parents that they can say, oh man, I really think I messed this up, or, you know, my child came to me and said this today, and I don't know how to respond to them. Having a wealth of different potential answers, you're more likely to either find one that works for you as that parent, or you find one that kind of works enough for you that you can then kind of make it your own. And to be able to do that in a group of parents without feeling as though you are going to be judged for the choices you make as a parent, I think can be really difficult, because you don't want to show that vulnerability as a parent to others if you're afraid that you are then going to be judged as a bad parent or something like that. So if you have a group, or if you have other close parents that you as the parent feel you can be open with and that you won't be judged on, going to them and kind of talking it out can be helpful for sure.
I guess, oh, sorry, go ahead.
If parents think about that they're raising citizens of the world, not raising children, they're raising citizens of the world who are going to carry the world in their hands. That would help get rid of some of the defensiveness and fear and all those things. And as much as I put responsibility on the parents, I think young adults who are born and brought up here also should take some leadership in figuring out the cultural divide. I'm telling you, I mean, that's what I think it's important, because I mean, most of the time in my practice, I always come down heavy on the parents, that, you know, this is how, you know, how to look at this whole thing differently. But I think it's important for young adults too, because there is a logic to Indian culture and values. There's a logic to the Caucasian values, and, you know, there's a logic to both, and there's a strong logic to both. So naturally, the corollaries that come from that basic logic will be different. So I really think it's important that young adults also take leadership in bridging this gap.
No, I agree. I think there has to be more communication and understanding from both ends. I guess the way I kind of took, like, just to a little bit dig into this question before we end the call, I was kind of thinking that maybe they're asking about like expectations for kids, and I guess like in Indian parents, I feel like it's kind of true when they kind of say, oh, like my kid is going to be a doctor, like I'm so proud. And I think kind of talking about that a little bit, I would start off with, there's many ways to be successful, and the book is like still incomplete. Like if you were reading like even like Mark Zuckerberg's book, and like before he like came up with the Facebook, you would think, wow, he's a failure. So I think kind of not judging your kids in that way, and kind of not comparing your kids to other kids is kind of helpful to kind of eliminate some of those high expectations. Is that kind of what you guys were talking about when you asked about expectations? That's kind of what I was thinking, but please add to like how can
there's a saying, right? Those people who dropped out of high school, college, are the ones who run this world, and those who got straight A's work for them. So yeah, so there's many ways. I have seen a number of young adults who come through my office who wants to specialize in something different, and the parents are absolutely against it, or they want to date or are non-Indian, and the parents are against it. So they have a double life, dual life, one in front of the parents and one behind the parents' back. So that is the challenge I make to the younger people. You consider yourself an adult. You're 18 plus, you're 20, whatever. You consider yourself an adult. So what are you going to do about this? You have been, I had a client who was dating many years from high school. Parents didn't know. And I'm saying, what kind of an adult would do that? What kind of a grown, mature person would hide girlfriend for this many years? So I do challenge the younger people, stand up to it, convince them. So that's what I feel from on the side of the young adults, that they talk, argue, fight, come back and do it all over again, but keep it going, keep the communication going, so that you listen to what they're saying, you tell them what you think, and arrive at something that's. And one thing I have noticed over and over and over again is that if the kids stand up, the parents will listen. If they keep coming and saying, this is the way I want it, this is the way I want it, the parents do listen. The kids are scared as well.
And ultimately, again, parents want their children to be happy.
Yep.
And what that happiness looks like for each individual is going to be so different compared to other individuals.
Yeah.
And so keeping that in the back of one's mind is really important, that if you can be happy doing something different, doing something that isn't necessarily, being a doctor, being a lawyer, being whatever, is your child happy? Is something that every parent wants.
Okay, so for our last question, if you could kind of fill in the blank, I wish my parent could do blank, like in your experience, what do kids usually talk to say? Just like a good way to end the conversation.
Listen.
Mm-hmm.
Every single kid, elementary school, middle school, high school, college. My oldest American-born patient is 52. From elementary school to 52, that's what they say. I wish they'd listen to what I'm saying.
And by listening, they don't mean just hear the words. Listen to what it means. Don't just say, oh yeah, I heard you say, whatever, and then move on past it. When they say, I want them to listen, they want to have that connection. They want their parent to show understanding. And if they can't understand, trying to understand. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to understand the choices your child makes 100% of the time. But you need to be open to trying to understand what your child is trying to get at. And trying is so important. If you can show that you're putting forth the effort to understanding where your child is coming from, that's going to get you farther than you could ever think.
All right. Thank you so much for this conversation and all your advice. I feel like this is a great way to kind of start talking more about mental health and kind of make the conversations more frequent. I just does someone else from MCICC want to talk a little bit about, okay. Could you, Jay Uncle, could you please finish off the conversation with a few comments about
Yeah.
MCICC?
Definitely. Again, thank you everyone for being here. We know that, it's nice out there and you could be somewhere else, but thank you again. First of all, thanks to all the India-based organizations in McLean County for supporting and spreading the word about this event. Many thanks to Dr. Viji Susarla, who just got off the plane and decided to be with us. So we really, really appreciate it. And also Nona from Bloomington. Thank you so much for both of you to providing the valuable insights about this particular topic. And again, thanks to all the audience for spending your valuable evening with us and asking some important questions and providing some feedback as well. MCICC and Gautami, not but not least, and thank you so much for moderating this. You did awesome. Go, you should be proud. MCICC plans to come up with more discussions like this in the future. So if you have any feedback on today's session, please fill out the form that Funny has put out in the chat box. We will also plan to share this on our Facebook and through email. But if you like to be in the know of our future sessions, please follow us on the social media. It's facebook.com/askmcicc. And of course, you can always reach out to us via email, mciCommunicates@gmail.com. And again, thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate you being here, including the panelists and Gautami and the MCIC members and the committee members. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you for having
Thank you
me.
very much.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Bye.